We're on page 62 of lesson 11. Does God condone or overlook lying? And I don't know whether the author here has wrote this material at a different point in time as to why he left his outline sort of thing and gone to paragraphs. It's almost like these are articles he's written that he's attached into here, rather, or bulletin articles or something. Whereas the first few lessons were outline form. The last few lessons are very much paragraph form. If we read through scriptures, what do you think God's attitude of lying is? He hates lying. In fact, the scriptures are very clear on that. Naomi, you want to get Proverbs chapter 12, verse 22, and Tammy can get Proverbs chapter 6, verses 16 to 19. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 22.
Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord. Those who act faithfully are his delight.
Proverbs 6, 16 to 19.
These 6 things the Lord hates, yes, 7 are an abomination to him: a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift in running to evil, a false witness who speaks lies, and one who sows discord among brothers.
7 things, and lying is listed there twice. Not only lying, but being a false witness, which is also lying, but even in the 10 Commandments, it's don't bear false witness. So in other words, your lie is not just to protect yourself, your lie is to hurt someone else. And so in that sense, you could have 2 categories of lying. Well, lying to protect yourself, we often call that harmless. Whereas lying that will actually hurt someone else, cause them to lose their life or liberty or money, that would be even worse, even though it's still lying. God hates it. And we find from scriptures that not only does God hate it, he does not and cannot lie. Let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 15. And Bill can get verse 29. And Numbers chapter 23, verse 19, I'll give to Henry. 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 29.
And also the strength of Israel will not lie nor relent, for he is not a man that he should relent.
All right, so Samuel is talking to Saul here, and he says that he has told Saul that God is going to tear the kingdom from you. And he says God's not lying about that. He will not lie or relent. Some versions would have repent there. He's not going to change. He had already told Saul that his kingdom wouldn't continue. That was in chapter 13. But in chapter 15, after Saul didn't destroy the Amalekites as God had ordered him to, he said, I'm not going to change my mind about it. Sometimes God changed his mind. He said, no, Lord doesn't lie, and he's not relenting here. So God doesn't lie. Numbers chapter 23, verse 19.
God is not a man, and that he should lie, nor a son of man, that he should repent. As he said, and will he not do? And has he spoken, or will he not make it good?
Okay. Balaam is speaking here to Balak. And basically he said the same thing that Samuel did in 1 Samuel 15. God does not lie. So not only does he hate lying, he doesn't practice it either. There's a lot of things that we say we hate and then we go about doing them. Well, do we really hate them if we go about doing them? God not only hates lying, but he is not partaking in it himself. Yet there is some people who believe the scriptures not only condone lying, but that God blesses people when they lie, or because they lie, or God overlooks lying and really doesn't care that much about it, because what resulted from that was somehow okay. And so we have to look at that question, because people come along and basically they'll reject the Bible for being hypocritical. They charge God with hypocrisy. And so how can I follow a God that says one thing and does another? And so we're going to look at some instances when Bible characters lie. We're going to discuss what the lie was. And we're going to discuss whether the passage tells us whether or not God approved of that lie. Because that's the conclusion people jump to. Scripture said it, therefore God must approve it. And if you've been listening to the podcast recently, you've found numerous times late in the life of David that the Bible records things that God did not approve of, that even though the passage doesn't specifically say. Like, as far as we can know, God didn't approve of it, but the passage doesn't always have to tell us God didn't approve of it, because other passages tell us God doesn't approve of something. Let's go back to Abraham. Abraham is one of there are some famous characters who do lie throughout scriptures. But Abraham is one of the first men. I guess you can have Cain in there as well. Maybe Cain is the first man that we receive lying. Satan is the first liar in chapter 3. But when Cain tells God he doesn't know where Abel is, when in fact he very much does because he killed him, that perhaps is the first lie that man told in Scripture. But Abraham is famous for lying, and this lie in particular. Naomi, you want to get Genesis 12, verse 11, 13, and 18.
When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai, his wife, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife?
Okay, so what did Abraham tell Sarah to say? To Pharaoh when they got to Egypt.
She was a sister.
She was his sister. Now we'll get to that point in a second. Pharaoh, what did Pharaoh... we'll ask a question before we get there. Why did Abraham tell Sarah to say she was his sister?
He's afraid they would kill him because of her, take her.
Yeah, if Abraham told Sarah, or Sarah would have said, I'm Abraham's wife, and Pharaoh would have said, well, she's a very beautiful woman, I want her for myself, I'm going to kill Abraham and take her. Now, I've always wondered, if Pharaoh was so scrupulous as to not take Abraham's wife without killing Abraham, why would he then kill Abraham? That's my point. Is if Pharaoh had a problem with adultery, so in other words, not just stealing Abraham's wife and letting Abraham go. Like as far as if Pharaoh had a problem with adultery, why did Abraham think that Pharaoh wouldn't also have a problem with murder? But it shows you what fear does. Fear causes us to do things that we should not do. Like as far as when Jesus said, if you deny me before man, I will deny you before my Father in heaven. And we come along and say, well, I'll never deny Jesus. Until push comes to shove. We're told, renounce Jesus or die. Well, before that, we really didn't have to show our cards. It was easy. Oh yes, I'm a follower of Jesus. Are we willing to give up our lives for it? And renounce Jesus or be thrown in jail. Renounce Jesus or I'm going to do this. And Peter found out very quickly what pride does when given the situation, deny Jesus or else. And so fear does things to us that it causes us to do things we should not do. It doesn't excuse what we do. So Abraham, this is the reason why. What did Pharaoh do when he found out from God that Abraham was, did he find out from God, or was it Abimelech? Yeah, he found out from God. It was Abimelech who saw, it was Isaac and Rebekah, I think. But anyway, he found out that Sarah was indeed Abraham's wife. What was his reaction?
Well, Pharaoh was upset. Abram,
Huh?
telling him.
Yeah. Think about it this way. We often think of the Egyptians as this godless people, and they were idolaters in Scripture. But they still had some scruples. Pharaoh didn't want to take Abraham's wife from him. If he would have known, we don't know how Pharaoh, well, we know Pharaoh treated Abraham well. So Abraham assumed something about Pharaoh without ever really knowing Pharaoh. And basically Pharaoh saying, why do you think I would have stolen your wife and killed you? Pharaoh has been insulted that Abraham thought so little of him to assume that he would have stolen her wife. He says, you've now caused plagues to come upon my people because God's plaguing me for taking your wife as my wife, or going to take her as my wife. We didn't get that from chapter 12. We don't find out again until Abraham does it again to Abimelech in chapter 20. Was Sarah Abraham's sister? Half-sister. So, was Abraham telling Sarah to tell a bald-faced lie? Just an absolute 100% untruth. No.
He was using it.
Yeah.
In a way to protect himself.
Yeah. His heart was in the wrong place, and he knew what Pharaoh would do had he found out, oh, she's not married, I'm going to take her as a wife. He kept something back from Pharaoh that Pharaoh needed to know. If Pharaoh had no desire to take Abraham's wife, to take Sarah's wife, perhaps we might come along and say, well, Abraham really didn't lie here because Pharaoh didn't need to know. Sometimes we run into situations where, and we'll discuss that a little later in this lesson, where we give the truth, the whole truth, as it's needed to know, but when it is not needed to know, we hold something back. The reason why this is lying here is Abraham is being intentionally deceptive about something he should have told. When you come up to the border, you're driving up to the border, and they ask you, what is your citizenship? And you tell them what your citizenship is. They say, where have you been? Well, I've been to someplace. There are certain things we have to declare at the border. Firearms, alcohol, and cigarettes. Those are the three things. Plus, if we're carrying more than $10,000. Those are automatic declarations. If the border doesn't ask you a question that you are not required to divulge, you are not doing wrong for not telling them everything. But if they tell you, do you have anything to declare? And you declare only part of what you are bringing back, you are lying to the border. Because they've asked you a question, they expect a full answer, Up until that point, they hadn't asked the question. They had decided, I don't want to know. And if I don't want to know, I don't need to know. But unless it was an automatic declaration at the border, and they tell you what those things are, you can hold back. And we'll find an example of that when it comes to Samuel in the book of 1 Samuel, when he goes to anoint David. But Abraham was in the situation where Pharaoh needed to know that not only was Sarah Abraham's sister, she was also his wife. And so people say, well, Abraham was blessed. This is at the beginning of our look at Abraham in chapter 12. Abraham hadn't had Isaac yet. He hadn't been blessed with great wealth yet. God blessed him because now the question is, did God bless him because he lied? Or did God bless him in spite of his lie? Yeah. God did not overlook Abraham's sin here. In fact, Abraham got expelled from Egypt. He got expelled from Egypt where he shouldn't have been in the first place. God had sent him to Canaan. And it was only because of a famine that Abraham came to Egypt. Instead of trusting in God and remaining in Canaan, God had promised him, through your seed all the nations of the world would be blessed. Do you really think God was going to allow Abraham to die in a famine? God didn't tell Abraham to go to Egypt. Abraham went on his own. Abraham got himself into trouble and then burned some bridges with Pharaoh. So in essence, Abraham suffered, but he didn't get struck down by God. Sometimes we see people being struck down by God, but usually that's for an egregious sin that someone has done that is going to drag down other people with him, or with them. And so Abraham was not blessed because he lied. Scriptures don't say God approved of the lie, and we can't assume that from the text. And we shouldn't assume that from the text. And so when we run into that problem, when we run into a situation like that, let us not come out saying, well, God approved. Let's skip ahead in Genesis and all the way down to the bottom of page 63 if you're following along. I'm going to skip a lot of these paragraphs because some of these stories are pretty similar, come up with the same sort of thing. But I'd like to deal with Jacob. Let's go to Genesis 25. Get verses 31 to 34. And Tammy can get that.
But Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright as of this day." And Esau said, "Look, I'm about to die, so what is his birthright to me?" Then Jacob said, "Swear to me as of this day." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau bread and stew of lentils. Then he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright.
Now some people say that Jacob lied here. Did Jacob lie here? It didn't say was Jacob acting right here. It said did Jacob lie here?
He didn't lie.
No. In fact, like as far as you might say, well, Jacob wasn't being fair. Esau wasn't being wise. Like as far as Jacob didn't threaten Esau. He said, well, if you want some of my stew, the price is your birthright. Jacob was the younger son, even if only by a couple minutes. And so in that case, two sons, the way birthrights went, if you had two sons, that means that the inheritance would be divided into 3 parts, and the older son would get 2 parts, and the younger son would get 1. So 67% of the inheritance went to the older son, 33% went to the younger son. Jacob doubled his inheritance that day. Doubled it for a bowl of stew. He didn't deceive his brother. He didn't lie to his brother. You might say, well, he cheated his brother. The scriptures don't say that. They say Esau despised his birthright. Esau was the one who just said, okay, I'll give it to you. It wasn't a fair trade. I'm not saying Jacob was completely innocent, and this is going to lead to family strife. But I don't accuse Jacob of lying here. However, when we come further on into the story, because of this, this leads to further family strife. Let's skip ahead to chapter 27. And Bill can get verses 19 and verse 24.
Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done just as you told me. Please arise, sit, and eat of my game, that your soul may bless me. And what's that one?
Verse 24.
Then he said, Are you really my son, Esau? He said, I am.
All right. Now in this passage, did Jacob lie? This passage, he really lied. He wasn't Esau. Yeah, Rebekah, his mother, dressed him up like Esau, prepared the stew with the game that Isaac liked. This time he lied. And yet, Jacob is going to have 12 sons. He is going to become rather rich. Like as far as when Joseph is sold into Egypt, his brothers were off tending the flocks in some other place. When you think about what Jacob left Laban with about 20 years later, he came away exceedingly rich. And so people come along and say, well, God blessed Jacob here. Jacob lied, and God blessed him anyway. What's the answer to that question? What's the answer to that statement? Sorry.
I wonder, God made a promise to Abraham.
Yes.
So that was from God, so that had to be fulfilled. God was going to fulfill it. My way of thinking is he uses men, like as time goes on, but if he changed his plan every time we sinned, like it would never
come to pass.
It wouldn't have been a promise.
Yeah.
It would have never been fulfilled.
What resulted from Jacob's lie here? Directly from the story. What did Jacob have happen to him immediately following the story? Do we remember? What was Esau's attitude? He was angry. How angry? He was going to kill him. Esau hated Jacob. So much so he was ready to kill him. Jacob had to run. Is that what Isaac would have wanted? Rebekah? Would that be what she wanted? No. In fact, from what we read in Scripture, Jacob suffered. He never saw his mother again after leaving for Laban. She died before he returned. He spent 14 years working for the wife that he wanted because Laban deceived him. Then he worked 6 more years to get what he should have been owed by Laban. Yes, he came away wealthy. But Jacob wasn't, when he was describing his life before Pharaoh, didn't say, oh, my life was great. He said, great and terrible has been my life. Jacob suffered because of his lies and the lies of others. Yes, he was blessed, but that blessing, as Bill said, was more as a result of what the promise to Abraham was than just directly because of Jacob and his righteousness. Yes, God can forgive Jacob. I'm not saying God didn't forgive Jacob. Just as I'm not saying God didn't forgive Abraham either, because clearly he did. But he didn't overlook this lie and just bless Jacob because of it. Jacob suffered because of this lie. Could God have blessed Jacob had he not lied? So in other words, if Jacob had remained in Canaan instead of having to flee to Laban, could God have blessed Jacob? Sure. Whether or not God would have sent, like as far as, remember, Abraham didn't allow Isaac to go get Rebekah. He sent his servant up to Bethuel, and that's how Rebekah came to him. Isaac might have done something very similar had Jacob not done this and had to flee. Perhaps Jacob would have received Rachel right away instead of having to marry Leah and then have the two concubines and all the rivalry that came with that. You think about Jacob's story and how God accomplished his purpose despite all of Jacob's missteps, all of Laban's deceptions. God accomplished his purpose anyway. But that's not saying that God had to accomplish his purpose that way. God can accomplish his purpose however God sees fit. Our choices are not going to change God's purpose if God's purpose requires some promise to be fulfilled. Today, God's promises have been fulfilled. And so, what is God's purpose? For the church to grow. Well, man's efforts to destroy the church is not going to stop God. So in other words, if local churches come and go, or if most of this world becomes evil, that's not going to stop God's church. It's not going to make God's church go extinct. God's purpose is for mankind to be saved through Jesus Christ and his church to grow. God will accomplish that purpose, no matter what sinful men do that might bring some of the church into disrepute. So Jacob wasn't blessed for lying here. He suffered for lying here. Now I'd like to go to, he goes to David. I'd like to save David until, Lord willing, next week. So we're going to go a little out of order here. We're on page 64. I'd like to deal with the midwives of Exodus chapter 1. Let's read. Henry, you want to get Exodus chapter 1, verses 15 through 18. And Naomi can get 19 through 21. Bill, I didn't skip you, Bill, did I?
15 to 18.
Yes, 15 through 18.
And then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Sephra, and the name of other Torah. And he said, when you do the duties of the midwife for the Hebrew woman, and seizing on both shoulders, if it is a son, then you should kill him. But if it is a daughter, then she shall not. But the midwives feared God, and did not do as the king of Egypt, and commanded them, and saved the male children alive. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives, and said to them, why have you done this thing, and saved the male children alive?
The midwife said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and gave birth before the midwife comes to them. So God dealt well with the midwives, the people multiplied and grew very strong. because the midwives feared God who gave them families.
Okay. A lot of people like to come along in Exodus chapter 1 and say that the midwives lied. Does the passage say that? No. It's a lot like Jacob with the stew. Abraham's lie, very obvious. Pharaoh came and said, "You didn't tell me she was your wife." Jacob with the stew, the Bible doesn't comment and call that a lie. And we can't determine from that passage it was. Jacob and Isaac, very obvious, lie. He's not Esau. That's a lie. The command was, don't, or when the women give birth, if it's a male, kill it. Why didn't the midwives do that? There's two words in there that tell us why they didn't do that. They feared God. That would be murder. The midwives were not going to murder children. This was one of those examples. Government tells you to do something that goes against God's law, don't do it. Well, even if the Prime Minister of Canada says you have to kill everyone who doesn't do whatever the government wants you to do, we can't do that. That's murder. Well, these women didn't do that. What did they tell Pharaoh? What specifically did they say when he asked them, why didn't you do what I told you to do?
Kind of blamed the Hebrew women, saying that they were giving birth themselves.
Yeah. What appears to have happened here was that the midwives intentionally were not there. Because remember, the command here was, when you do the duties of a midwife and you see them in the birth stools, if it is a son, you shall kill him. The command was to kill them while they are being born. If you see it as a male, you kill them. Now, in today's society, which is so confused on gender, I don't know how the midwives could have ever done it, because we have people out there who come along. Well, it doesn't matter what their body parts look like. They got to tell us whether they're a man or a woman when they're old enough to tell us that. Hogwash. Pharaoh was very obviously saying, if it has the parts of a male, you kill it. And so these midwives here obviously had come up with a way, okay, they must have probably prepared the women for birth, but either stepped out or were not there when the children were born, and so they didn't have to kill them. I can't say they lied here, because the scriptures don't say they lied. It is not obvious that they lied. Perhaps the Israelite women were more lively in giving birth. I don't know. Remember, God had miraculously blessed Israel with a lot of children. Can you imagine? I said, Barbara here has had 10 children. When I told that to someone, she said, how could she do that? Well, she did. She had 10 children. A lot of people come along and say, that's a lot of children. Well, it's a lot of children. But she did it. Can you imagine having more than 10? Some people have 12. There's a television show. A person had 20 children. Like, as far as I know, birthing is hard. Some say it gets easier the more you do it, but I can't imagine that either. But if God miraculously blessed Israel, he could have made it easier for them to give birth so that the children didn't die in childbirth. But to come along and say that these women lied to Pharaoh when the scriptures don't say that is just as bad as saying God blessed them for lying. I don't believe they lied here. I believe that they made it so that they didn't have to lie. Sometimes we tell people, don't tell me something so that I don't have to not lie. We might know something is going to happen. And we say, I don't want to know it so that I can deny it. And these midwives knew these women were pregnant. They knew they were about to give birth. But they probably told these women, don't call for me. Give birth. I'll come and help you afterwards. But don't call for me, because Pharaoh's going to call for me and then complain why I didn't do what he said. God blessed them because they feared him and they saved those lives. But to come along and say that he blessed them for lying is speaking where the scriptures do not speak, because the scriptures do not call this a lie. So, I say much the same in the podcast. I said we make a lot of assumptions out of Exodus chapter 1. We need to be careful with our assumptions that we don't come along and say something the scriptures don't say. If it's not obvious that this is a lie, let's not call it sin when the scriptures don't. I'm not ashamed to hold my Lord, nor to defend